Hi, my name is James Shepard with CC Sales Pro, and today I'm going to share with you 3 ways that you can deal with objections. 3 ways you can deal with objections. Number 1, you can avoid them, and that's the ideal way to handle it. We'll talk about that. The second thing you can do is you can just ignore them or rephrase them, and we'll talk about those strategies. The third thing that you can do is you can educate the prospect. So we're going to talk about avoid, ignore, or educate. And those are the 3 things, the 3 ways you can deal with objections. So let's start off and talk about the first thing that you can do. The first thing you can do is that you can avoid them. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that salespeople make, and even sales managers, is that when they get an objection, the first thing they think about is, how could I rebuttal that objection? How could I come up with some really cool line that would get people to, get them from no back into yes? But the first question that I always ask when a sales rep tells me they're hearing a certain objection is, I always ask first, why are you getting that objection in the first place? Why did they tell you that in the first place? What did you say that got them to that point? And so the first thing you always want to do is look at your pitch. Many times you have an opening pitch that's not effective. You have, you're saying something that is eliciting a response. And so understand that when you walk into a business, the prospect is responding to you. They're responding to you. So if they're responding to you, then it's something that you're saying is eliciting the response that they're giving you. You call that response an objection, but the first thing I call it is a response. So maybe there's something you could say differently so that they wouldn't give you that objection in the first place. Sales, and I have a whole course on directing the sales flow. Sales is all about that sales flow. It's all about getting the flow of the sale to the point where you're able to get them to say what you want them to say, get them where you need them to go in the sale, rather than you trying to get them from somebody who's not interested to being interested. So the first thing that you can do to overcome an objection is to simply avoid the objection altogether by thinking through your pitch and making sure that you're saying the right thing to hopefully just avoid it altogether. The next thing you can do, if you tried that, but hey, you still are going to get those objections. I've been in sales for a long time, about 13, 14 years I've been in sales, and I still get objections all the time because it's sales. You're going to get objections because, you don't want to be the type of salesperson that's so smooth that you get somebody to buy something that they don't even want. You're going to have objections. And so how do you overcome those objections when you get them? Well, the first thing you can do is what I call ignoring the objection. Now, that's a little bit of a strong word to use, but the idea is that you're going to pivot away from the objection, or you're going to reframe the objection. So let me give you a couple of possible scenarios that you might use. One thing that you could do is you can use a pivot word like the word anyway. And so this will sound really funny when I describe it to you here on the video, or if you're listening on the podcast. But what you can do is somebody will tell me something like, they'll bring up some random thing that we weren't even talking about that's a concern for them, like, I don't know, James, we're not really sure about this because, we have this terminal here that we got a couple years ago and our team is all, using it, and I don't know if we want to switch yet. And I'll say, that's a really good point that we are definitely going to discuss at some point in the future here as we move a little closer. Anyway, one of the other questions I had for you was, so you see what I did? I just kind of acknowledged it and then said anyway to pivot. Or the other thing I'll do is I'll say one other thing or one other question I had for you. So I'd say, well, that's a really good question, Susan. Thank you for bringing that up. Now, one other question I had for you, though, before that is, whatever, and I ask a different question. So what you can actually do, and I know that sounds a little crazy, but you can actually just kind of ignore that objection and you can deal with it later, because a lot of times and again, you have to be honest about it. You have to recognize a true objection that's this is a legitimate concern for somebody versus they're just saying something to try to throw you off and get you out of the business, and so that you can stop your pitch. So in that case, a lot of times I'll just kind of ignore it. The other way that you can do it is you can also reframe it as part of this. So I'll give you a good example. you're trying to close the sale and then somebody brings up an objection to you. And so that's always really bad. You're at the end and, maybe you've already closed it. And so you're trying to overcome this objection at the very, very end. One of the things you can do is you can reframe an objection and actually have the objection become a question. And so somebody will say something to me like they'll say, James, we're really just not interested right now because we just don't think it's really going to provide us any, real savings. And I'll say, Susan, that's a great question. Now, here's what I found. And then I'll go into answering the question that I really didn't get. But you can take an objection and reframe it as a question. Once you answer the question, you follow that up by saying, are there any other questions that you have for me? So you can take the conversation from adversarial, where it's like them saying, I don't want it, you trying to convince them, and just reframe that into a question and answer session and say, that's a great question, Susan. One of the things I know we could do for you is, we could bring the transaction fee down maybe another penny. What that would do is provide a little bit more savings, more towards what you're looking at. So hopefully that'll kind of provide more of the savings of what you want. Are there any other questions that you have for me? So what that actually does is it reframes the whole conversation as question and answer rather than objection and rebuttal. So we talked about, first of all, avoiding the objection, which basically is about thinking about your pitch. What is it you're saying that's getting them to respond with an objection and then changing it? Second thing we talked about is basically just ignoring the objection, which means you're either using a pivot like anyway or one other thing, and you're just basically acknowledging the objection and then moving right past it to something that you want to talk about. And then we also talked about reframing the objection as part of kind of the ignoring thing, is just kind of reframing and ignoring the fact that it's an objection and instead treating it like a question, okay? So those are some really effective ways to deal with the objection, or basically to not deal with the objection as an objection. But what about the third thing? What about when you actually get a legitimate objection and you actually get one that's a real question? It's something that's a legitimate objection and you're going to have to deal with it. There's no way for you to reframe it. You can't pivot. You certainly can't ignore it. So what do you do in that case? Well, in that case, that's when you want to educate. That's when you want to educate. So you say, well, James, how do I educate the merchant? Well, number one, first of all, make sure you have something to educate them about. Make sure you know what you're talking about. If you're an individual sales representative, make sure you go to instantquotetool.com and go through the training that's there. It's free for 30 days. You can get all my best courses free for 30 days and go through courses like advanced statement analysis training, how to read a statement, understanding merchant services, cost structures. These are all great training courses you can go through so you have something to talk about, so that when they do ask you a question, instead of you feeling like you have to pivot because you literally don't know what to say, you could actually be educated in the industry. I'm amazed at how many salespeople I talk to in the merchant services industry and in other industries that just don't know that much about their own industry. If you're in merchant services and you don't understand the interchange table, if you don't know, what percentage of downgrades for a business would be really high, or you're like, I don't even know what a downgrade is, okay? You're in trouble. You're not going to be able to educate the client, and that's going to really, really hurt you because you just don't know what you're talking about yet. So again, go to instantquotetool.com, get the free 30-day trial, and with that free 30 days, you're going to get the training that's if you click on the training link. If you are an ISO, if you are a processor, if you are a recruiter and you're building a team of salespeople, guess what? Your sales numbers are being hurt by the fact that your salespeople do not know how to educate the merchant. And believe me, I understand the methodology here, right? Like, you're recruiting a bunch of people, you're getting them out in the field, you want to see if they're going to take action before you personally put your time and your management team time into getting this person trained extensively on the whole industry, because it's a lot, and I get that. So guess what? Contact me and I will brand our training for your company, and we'll put it into a learning management system for your team, and you can track their progress, and you can say things in a sales meeting like, everybody needs to make sure that they've completed this course, advanced statement training, before next Monday, and I'll know if you did because I can look in our learning management system and see that you completed it and see if you passed the test that's at the end of the course. So having a learning management system is a really powerful accountability tool for the sales team. So make sure that you know what you're talking about. Make sure your reps know what they're talking about, okay? Now, once that happens, what you need to do is you need to, if you're the sales rep, as long as you know what to say, this is really the time from that objection where you've got to slow down, I talk really fast. That's my natural state. But when somebody gives me a legitimate objection and I'm going to educate them, it's time to slow down, lower your voice a little bit, okay, and acknowledge the legitimacy of their objection and then teach them something. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say that somebody said to me, James, I'm not really interested because all of you guys, all you credit card processing companies charge way too much. I always end up spending 4 or 5% of my total processing on, credit card processing fees. So unless you can get me down to like 2% or something, I don't even want to talk about it. Now, that is a very legitimate objection. Now, the only reason that their effective rate would be that high, no matter who you're with, the only reason you can't get the effective rate down is because of their average ticket size. So their average ticket size might be at, $7 or $5. And when somebody has an average ticket size of $7 to $5, they're processing a lot of regulated check cards. Well, regulated check cards have a 22-cent per item fee that you just can't get rid of. So a 22-cent per item fee on a $1 transaction, that's a 22% effective rate just with the transaction fee, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. So here we have a legitimate objection. I'm going to show you how I would handle that as far as educating the prospect. Ready? This is what I would do. So if you were the prospect and you just told me that, and that was your concern, here's what I would do. I would do this. That's a really, really good point that you're making there, Bob. And I apologize that no one has really ever taken the time to explain exactly why that keeps happening to you. Because I have bad news and good news. The bad news is that this is going to keep happening to you no matter who you're with. I can save you some money, but there's a line where we can't go below it. And it's very frustrating for a business like yours because there's all these other companies. You probably have friends with businesses that are paying 2%, 1.8%. Here's what it is. It's your average ticket size. A few years back, you're familiar with the Dodd-Frank law that came out, the financial reform regulation. You probably heard about that with all the banks and everything. Part of that regulation was something called the Durbin Amendment. Senator Durbin came out with the Durbin Amendment. And the Durbin Amendment, what it actually does is it regulated the check card fees way down, which is great for most people. But the trade-off is a 22-cent transaction fee. It's regulated by the government. You're always going to pay at least 22 cents plus a small markup on every check card transaction. Well, you have two things working against you. You have a small ticket size, so that works against you because 22 cents on $5 is a lot worse than 22 cents on 100, right? So that's working against you. Then on top of that, because you're small ticket, everybody uses their check card because nobody wants to use their rewards card on a $5 transaction. So you have two things working against you there. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that there are talks right now about even repealing the Durbin Amendment. That's been talked about a lot, or at the very least, overhauling interchange to potentially lower that. What I'd like to do is put you on interchange plus pricing so that as those changes come, down the pike, I will keep you informed about that and make sure that you know what's going on. And so really the best thing I can do for you is give you the lowest possible markup. And the other thing I can do is keep you in the loop about changes to the interchange table and the way that that all works. If I'm willing to keep you in the loop on this and partner with you to reduce your costs, not, tomorrow, but over the long run, is that a relationship you're interested in forming? So saying something like that is what's going to actually educate the merchant, and it's going to be a way to overcome that objection through education. So the 3 ways to overcome an objection. Number 1, you have to try and totally avoid the objection altogether. Say something different so you get a different response. Second thing is ignore it, which means kind of repurpose it. Do something a little different to avoid it or get around it or whatever. And we talked about reframing it and different things you can do, pivoting from it. The third thing is, if it's a totally legitimate objection, is you can educate the merchant. To do that, you need to know what you're talking about. So make sure you go to instantquotetool.com, sign up for a free 30-day trial, and go through the training courses there. I know it'll be a help to you. My name is James Shepard. Thanks for watching or listening today.